One other thing I think that intimidates a lot of people about doing hardcore reenactment is the expense. And I'd say really it can be as expensive or not as expensive as you want it to be, firearms aside. I think as reenactors, we tend to just have too much stuff. Guys that are doing native portrayals, very often they're just dripping in beads and silver and things like that. And yeah, that could have been, but I think in the most part, most of us don't walk around dressed in tuxedos every day. So I'd say when you're doing reenactment, a lot of times less is more. Strive. My friend Mark Baker used to always say, "Strive to be common," and I would say, "Huzzah!" Yeah, that's the thing.
Welcome to Session 5 of the Getting Started series. This one is on, what is it on again? I forgot already.
Building the Outer Person.
Building the Outer Person. So let's review about the earlier sessions, just so we know where we're at. Right?
Session 1, it was very simple. You got to believe that you can do this.
Yes.
Set aside any excuses that you may have, whether they're legitimate or not, but you got to believe you can do this.
Because you can. It's not that difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Session 2 was about connecting, specifically finding mentors or a group, somebody to work with. Even if it's a virtual group online, find some other people to connect with that have already gone through the process. It will shortcut this preparation, the difficulty. It'll make it much easier.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Session 3, we talked about choosing your persona, which is what April responded to. And really, choosing your persona gives you a place to start. It gives you a focus for your research. So now, choosing your persona now, you may discover later on that you want a different persona. We're just saying, go on ahead and choose 1, 2, 3 that you can start working with.
Right. And session 4, of course, we were talking about research and where you want to find that research and
the different types of research.
Right, the primary and secondary. And so we went through a lot of that kind of research stuff, which we thrive on and love doing the research. It is a lot of fun.
So when we talk about building the outer person, what is that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. What do we do when we want to build an outer person? The outer person is the physical look, the clothing, your equipment. That's the outer person. Mm-hmm. And it's the shell, of course. And it's what people are going to see right away, but there's so much more to putting together a persona. But we have to start someplace, and the outer person is a great place to start.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it assumes that we've chosen our persona, and it assumes that we have begun our journey into research. Even
assuming that we have found a group and this persona fits within that group somehow. So this step obviously builds on the previous steps.
Right. And one thing too, we were talking about this earlier, really the more work that you can put into those earlier steps, the more thought, the more development of those previous steps, the easier this is going to be.
Easier and fewer costly mistakes. I mean, it's going to make it quicker as we go through. It's like all of a sudden we know exactly what we're looking for as we're doing our research and as we're looking for things to buy. This was going to work. That's not going to work, and we know we don't accidentally buy things that just aren't going to work for us, or spend a great amount of time putting it together yourself, all to find out, oh, that wasn't the right thing to do all along. I wanted, this is the right thing to do.
So having this initial persona selected, whether it's a specific person or a generic character, gives us something to focus our research on. The types of research. Let's review that
so
again.
we talked about primary and secondary research, research that is directly from the 18th century, if we're doing 18th century primary research, and then secondary research, books that have been put together in a contemporary setting. Usually, somebody's collected a whole bunch of information for us, interpreted it for us, and packaged it all together in a little book, or a big book, so that the research is already, it's condensed, it's boiled down for us so that it just has what we need. And that is a great place to start as we're doing the research for the outer person.
Right. We talked last time when we talked about research that secondary research is a great place to start. The best research, the best secondary research is stuff that's well documented. It's got footnotes, it's got a bibliography.
Right.
And then if it doesn't have that, really what they're good for is just raising more questions for us to
Right.
pursue the answer to.
At least you can use that and say, is this right or wrong? Is that right or wrong? And so it does give us a good place to start off with. And if you're looking to build the outer person, I've got some secondary research here, and it's really good examples of many different types. Both of the types that are really good and maybe have some problematic issues with them. If you want to put together a sailor from the 18th century or Revolutionary Wartime period, Keith Wilbur's book on Pirates and Patriots is really good. It's full of his illustrations with all the equipment and all of what a sailor is going to wear. But the problem with his is that they are not. It's not footnoted. And it doesn't even have a bibliography. So it can be really good information. Unfortunately, every piece that we use in here, we have to go and find some real good primary research that helps back up this information. Again, it's condensed it. It's like, here you go. It's all laid out for you. But you really need to go and find pictures and other research to help back that up.
So it's almost as if he's done all this research and produced this great book, but now we have to go back and verify the research.
Do it all again, and really, it is a sign of the times. I believe this book, when it was originally printed, it was originally published in 1973.
Okay,
so it's from an era when. And he wasn't as concerned. He didn't necessarily make this book specifically for reenactors. So it's missing some of those components that we would cry out for. Where's the bibliography? Where's the individual footnote? We've got some other pieces here. If you were doing a long hunter, here's recreating the American Long Hunter by Ruckman. And that, you can see right here, boom, I just open it up to one page. He's got 4 footnotes right here backing up these individual pieces of information. So much more helpful to find a book like this where we can really dig into something.
Do we offer that book on our website?
I think so.
Yeah, I believe so.
So some of these books are like that.
Well, let's
Right. There's a good one for putting together a woman's outfit.
Whatever Shall I Wear by Mara Riley.
Right. For military, obviously, there's all kinds of Osprey books, and they're kind of half and half. They have some good. There's some good bibliography there. That's maybe not footnoted as much as you want, and they tend to be really thin summaries. One of the old standbys was Copeland's book on. I'm sorry, that's a different one. Oh. Copeland's book here, Working Dress in Colonial and Revolutionary America, and many of the most of the artwork is his own artwork reworking pictures that he had seen, and sometimes these do have sources. Some of the sources are himself, though, which is not so good. It's like, you can find this in one of my own books. That's not very helpful. Other times there are sources. This is based off a drawing, 1778. This guy, this author, or this artist. So a little bit more helpful.
What was the title of that book?
This one's called "Working Dress in Colonial America and Revolutionary America." And Copeland did he did a bunch of the coloring books that Dover had that were 18th century and other ones. Some other ones that are specifically, this is an old version of the cover, but a cut of men's clothing, helps you figure out what men's clothing is going to be like over different time periods. Sometimes you just want to dig through books with art, full of art. And
The art of dress.
Yeah, that's actually a bit more like primary research because you're looking at a small version of the actual 18th century painting instead of a rework of it like Copeland's is, which is his sketch of a period painting.
Speaking of primary research, and we are jumping ahead a little bit
Right.
because we've been talking about secondary research. British Tars, the blog,
Right.
is a very good resource for sailors'
Right.
uniforms, 1740, 1790, British and American.
Right.
Tell us about this book, John.
Oh, well, there's Collector's Encyclopedia of the American Revolution by Newman. It's, a really old standby that everyone uses for not mostly clothing, but for equipment. What the guns look like, what the bowls and all the different little pieces. Now, this is probably less used today than it was 20 years ago when it was a go-to resource because there isn't a lot of documentation for these basically out-of-context relics.
Right.
So you have to judge you have to take their interpretation of whether this piece is actually a Revolutionary War piece. So it's like an out of context piece of information. You just really don't know because they just bought all kinds of old pieces from collections and they say, yeah, that's from the Revolutionary War. It's like, well, does it have a date on it? Does it have the guy's name on it? No, the very vast majority of those pieces don't have that. And so you really have to take their word for it that those pieces are actually 18th century pieces.
So let's go back. Okay, that's secondary research,
And it's
primarily.
really good because it's all condensed down for us. I mean, like this little Long Hunter book. It's a tiny little book, but it's chock full of only information about long hunters. You might, if you were looking at primary research, you might dig through a 500-page book and there was 3 sentences on a long hunter. And they didn't even call it a long hunter, so you wouldn't know that that's what's really happening. A book like this is going to make it really quick to find the information.
So in contrast, then we have primary research,
Right.
For this outer person.
Right. So for the outer person, we're going to probably start with things like artwork. Is there any artwork of the kind of persona that you have chosen, specifically, hopefully, from the time period and from the location? Although if you're doing North American, there just is not very much artwork to work with.
Right.
And the kind of people we like to, do, it's like artwork of long hunters. There isn't any. Good luck with that. There's very, very few pieces that you can really point to and say, yeah, that's a painting of a long hunter.
I've seen 19th century,
Yeah.
but 18th century or earlier.
Yeah, it's not out
North
there. There just
American.
was not that much art being done and definitely not about that kind of a person. So artwork can be difficult.
But there are like narratives that you can read.
Right. And besides the fact that we can extrapolate with artwork, we can guess that some of these European pieces that person's going to look like that. But yes, so there are narratives that help us come up with what people are wearing. So whether it's a diary or
A journal of
a
some
journal
kind,
or
right?
something like that, or sometimes they call them narratives, narrative of a captive or whatever. They will describe what the outer person is like, what their clothing is like, and or their hair and their equipment. So we have some ideas about what those were, and we do have lots of North American narratives to work with.
And also, John, don't forget about museums. A lot of times museums will have collections of period clothing.
There are many period collections of clothing, and hopefully at times they can really narrow down the year and the person for those, because they know where those pieces actually came from. Sometimes they're out of context and we have to do guessing. Other times you can get some real spot on ideas.
So we've identified this persona that we're working on. We can begin our research, which really is a never-ending process. It's open-ended,
Ongoing.
So really, we finally come to this next step of
Right. We have a list. Let's say we have a list.
Yes, we have a list of items that we feel we need. And we've run that past our mentor. It's like, yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. No, you don't need that. No.
Right.
And now we're going to start procuring our clothing and our supplies.
And I really think the first thing we need to do is make sure to start out simple. We don't want to have the list of 20 things and say, I need all of these and I need them today. No. We should do our best to start out simple.
And, well, oftentimes,
Right.
people they didn't have this large collection of stuff. It was unusual to have that.
We're drowning in stuff.
Right.
And in the modern age, I mean, I probably have 50 shirts, I don't know. I only wear 3 of them, but I have all these shirts, I have, all these pair of pants it just wasn't like that. They did not have that. And if you look, I didn't bring it down up, but there was a really good book that has inventories after someone dies, and they inventoried this stuff. And so you had this list and you knew exactly what he had. He had 3 shirts. He had 2 pair of pants. It's very eye-opening. And the people that had inventories generally were not low-class people. This is somebody with property.
I want to read this. This is an excerpt from Catherine Strickland Parr's book, Backwoods of Canada. Now, this was published in 1837. It's a collection of letters that she wrote to her friends and family back in England. And this is a passage that talks about the Dutch oven. She's describing this utensil that she's found to be quite utilitarian. It is one of those things peculiarly adapted to the circumstances of settlers in the bush before they have collected those comforts about their homesteads within and without, that are the reward and the slow gleaning up of many years of toil. So she's even talking about that. It's like we don't have a lot of stuff, and those items, those were the results of having those. Was the result of many years of working to procure them.
Yeah, it's like modern day newlyweds that have nothing but cardboard boxes, or no furniture, empty apartment. And it was much like that for many people in the 18th century. They did not have houses filled with stuff. They didn't have closets filled with things. So when we start putting together this persona, we can start knowing, hey, if I only have 1 or 2, shirts, that's okay.
And that also goes to for your equipment and your supplies.
Right.
Now, some personas that you choose are automatically going to require more things or more expensive things. If you're interested in a long hunter, you're already talking about one of the most expensive things there in living history, and that's the long rifle.
Right. But what else did he have? Not that much.
Right. Right.
He had his bag with his food and his little bit of, accoutrements, but just not. He didn't need a whole bunch of stuff, and he probably didn't even have a tent. And
John, in addition to keeping it simple, people might also want to consider keeping it fairly generic.
Yeah, if we stay a little bit generic, it gives us some flexibility, and it lets us move our persona around a little bit. You dress like a 18th century farmer, and you might work for a militiaman too. And it lets us do more research as we get better, and that generic that generic outfit will morph into something a little bit more specific as we go.
Yeah. And there's a tool that we've developed that specifically addresses that idea, the generic
Right.
approach.
Livinghistorypersona.com. And there's always a link at the bottom of these emails that'll take you to that. And those are very generic personas to work with. But it does give you an idea about what kind of clothing goes with what other kind of clothing, and gives you an idea. What's a farmer going to look like from this time period? And it also lets you compare and contrast. What's the difference between an 1810 farmer versus a 1770 farmer or soldier, or whatever?
Now, John, there may be some viewers who they really don't know about James Townsend and Son, who we are and what we do, and let's just be right up front. That's how we make our money.
Right. We make our money by supplying people with the things their outer person. When people are building an outer person, they'll come to us and they'll purchase clothing, they'll purchase all their equipment or some of their equipment from us, and that's what we do.
That's what our catalog is about. That's what our website is about.
Helping people put together those outer persons.
Yeah.
But this isn't the only way to do it.
Right.
Many people, especially when you're starting out, you're going to be borrowing equipment. And that's one of the reasons why you want to connect with a group or with a mentor. Many times in those situations, there's equipment to borrow, and that helps you get started without spending a lot of money, and then you can develop that more specific persona and get your own equipment.
Yeah, people can get their feet wet without having to make these huge investments that they later discover, like, why did I buy that? Or I'm really interested in this rather than that. And we have advocated that from the beginning. It's like, borrow if you can if you're just getting started. So you can buy, and we'd love it if you'd buy from us, but we also urge people to borrow clothing when they're getting started. There's also a third option, and that is what we're calling borrow, brew your own.
Yes, make your own. Make your own. And this doesn't just necessarily include clothing, but other things too. But you can make your own equipment. You can make your own clothing. And some people, that's what they want to do. And for some personas, it works better than others. The Native American personas do a lot of making their own. Other than trade kettles and knives, and things they traded for specifically, everything else was made by the individual at the individual time. And so it really is one of those you really kind of need to make your own to a certain extent.
And there are all sorts of patterns out there for that.
Right, clothing patterns, fabric is available, and we do offer some clothing patterns and some fabrics, but a lot of that stuff is available, and not just for clothing, but if you want to experiment with blacksmithing or all these kind of crafts, the craftsmen are going to be making their own. Sometimes they make their own tools, sometimes they make their own equipment that they need. So
there's a debate or discussion that goes on in the living history circles, hand stitched versus machine stitched. We make machine sewn clothing. What are your thoughts on that?
It is wonderful when people can get to a hand sewn, when they can do hand sewing or get hand sewn pieces of clothing. Buying hand sewn pieces of clothing, that is very, very, very expensive. And in fact, I don't know if you look at 18th century pieces that have been sewn, some of them you can't tell that they were hand sewn. They're sewn so finely and nicely that you would think that they were machine sewn. But there's another, if you can find somebody to hand sew something and you can afford it, that's wonderful. But there's another option too, besides just sewing from scratch, hand sewing your own thing. And that is the idea of buying a piece of clothing that's machine sewn, and then you can rip out the seams and hand sew. And usually you can tell exactly where those seams went, so that especially once you get the thing that fits properly, it's like, well, I want it exactly like this. So you can go back through and hand sew over the top, or rip out the seams and hand sew that garment right back together again, and then you have a hand sewn garment. And it's something you can do over the winter on your kit.
Say,
it's like, well,
sounds...
it's winter time. It's going to be 6 months before, and it also gives you incentive to actually finish it. It's like, well, I won't have any clothes to wear unless I finish this up. So it may be a great way for somebody to move from my machine sewn thing. It isn't perfect. It isn't like I want to. I need this to be hand sewn for me, which most units do not say it has to be hand sewn. So it rarely is it has to be hand sewn kind of a situation, but many people like the idea of having hand sewn things, and that's one of the ways to do it.
Yeah. And I want to go back for just a second on the patterns. There can be some special challenges with patterns.
There's always a special challenge with patterns.
They vary between manufacturers. What are you and I were talking about that earlier? What were some of the...
Well, the main thing about any time when you work with a pattern, you can never trust it to work for you. It's like, here's anything. A shirt you might be able to get away with. A medium shirt is probably going to fit you if you're a medium. But anything that has any kind of measurements, a waistcoat, a coat, a pair of pants, you can't just say, that's my waist size. I'm going to make that out and it's going to fit me. It won't fit you. I can guarantee it won't fit you. And in fact, the pattern maker probably said, oh no, that you would never just cut your expensive material up and expect the first time that this pattern is going to produce a perfect fitting garment. That isn't the way it works. It's never worked that way. You really need to make it up out of scrap, some kind of a scrap fabric first. You make a mock-up of it, and then you adjust those patterns. Does it need to be bigger? Does this part need to be smaller or bigger? There's a bunch of different things that's the challenge of anytime you're working with a clothing pattern, instead of just buying something off the rack and it's going to fit, or have some tailor spend hours fitting something to you perfectly.
Another perfect wintertime project.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. John, I mentioned earlier that as you get into these various stages or steps, you discover that you might make a discovery or make a decision that causes you to go back and rethink or reevaluate previous steps, previous decisions. And clothing is another one. You may start out with an outfit, but what's the likelihood of that being the outfit that you stick with for the next 20 years?
Probably almost zero. You're always iterating. We're always getting a little, changing our idea a little bit, upgrading a little bit. And that's totally normal. We are upgrading and downgrading through our outfit. Sometimes when I say downgrade, I mean, it turns out we need a lower class of clothing, or we need this thing to actually be worn out, or whatever. But we continue to learn no matter what we do. I don't think we can help it. But especially in this sort of context, we continue to learn, and we continue to want to make our outfit, our outer man, be a little bit closer to what it should be. And so we're always finding, my shirt should be this way, or my coat should be that way. And so we're going to be changing it. Expect that to happen.
That reminds me, one thing that you'll often see at an event is someone will spread out a trader's blanket, and they will take the stuff that they have shed off. They no longer wear this, or they've upgraded, or they've downgraded, and they want to sell these things. It's a great way to pick up supplies for a fraction of what you would spend
right,
on the item new.
Yeah, we talked about buying. You don't always have to buy new. You can certainly buy used pieces, and sometimes you buy them and you rework them completely. It's like, this didn't fit me, or it's not quite the right style, but if I cut it and change it, it'll turn out to be more appropriate.
So, John, what happens if you show up an event and you don't have everything you need?
Well, if you read any of the narratives. You look at the equipment they had. I love the narratives. There was one I was reading just the other day, and they were talking about a squad of 6 soldiers, and between them they had like 2 spoons and a cup. That was it. It is perfectly legitimate in the 18th century to be poorly equipped.
Take your turn.
Right. Even that idea, we talked about keeping it simple and having too much equipment. If you look at George Washington's mess kit, it's this beautiful suitcase, and it's got all these little, things that put together, snap together. It's still not very big and not that well equipped. 99% of reenactors going out into the field now have more equipment than George Washington had, and he had more than anybody else ever. He even had a tent within his tent.
Wow.
He had, his big marquee tent, and then inside the big marquee tent was another tent. But just, for furniture, for, all this cooking equipment, he didn't have that much.
Well, John, I think that pretty much wraps it up for today. We have a homework assignment?
I think the assignment is to, you've got your persona. Let's start making a shopping list. Let's look at what we have. We've done you've done your research. You've hopefully found some secondary and some hopefully primary research to work with, and we can start to put together a list and think about procuring. And really, for the super beginner, if you've got that mentor in that group that you can borrow things, you can do it for little or no money. You can get started. But definitely, whether that shopping list is a borrowing shopping list or a buying shopping list, you need to start constructing that so you know what kind of pieces you want to look for. And remember to keep it simple.
Excellent idea. Yeah. Hey, next session, we're going to be talking about just getting out there and doing it. Start practicing your persona. Right. But I also wanted to bring up in a couple of sessions from now, we're going to have some very special guests with us to talk about developing that inner person.
Yes.
Today we talked about developing the outer person.
I'm excited about that.
Yes.
But it seems like it's going to be like a 3-hour episode. There's so much to cover on that.
We might have to break it up into multiple sessions.
Right. That's exciting, though.
But do stay tuned for that because we met these people recently, and they're amazing.
Yeah,
they're amazing people. So,
so don't forget the links. If you know of somebody else who's interested in living history, and make sure to send a link so that they can sign up for this, and they can go through the process because it's fun. And this is great. Also, there's links to Living History Persona. There's links to Living History Network, and of course to our website. As you're building that shopping list, you definitely want to take a look at our website. I want to thank you for your interest in this course and the information we're doing and coming along. I mean, you've already made it to session 5, and that means you're more than halfway through. We're more than halfway through. So this
depending on how many sessions we get out of our special guests.
Right.
So.
Okay.
But
it might not be
it.
more than halfway through, but it's going to be great and it's going to be fun. So thank you so much for your interest, and thanks for watching.